Uh, okay, continue. Okay, just a minute. Yeah. Can you, I'm not sure why it is not moving.
So just click on the screen and you can, I guess.
Yes. Now it's a little slow. Yeah. So here is the motivation for my grant writing and collaboration, because as I mentioned before, I did a certain section of my PhD in United States, and I was so lucky to have two professors, Professor Rebecca Safran and Sam Flexman, around 10 years ago at University of Colorado, who allowed me to audit their course in grant writing. Now, here I'd like to mention that in India, I never had an opportunity to attend any course which actually taught me how to write a grant, how to approach somebody. Here I am with a group of people at University of Colorado with some specialists in their field actually taught me how to do it. And later on, I use the learning for next 10 years to apply for different grants, make different collaborations with scientists from around the world to help not only my collaborative research effort, but also try to participate in larger scientific collegium. So I have applied for different fellowships, and in UK and United States, applied for different grants with Government of India as well as with Japan, and travel grants from different countries. So now for collaboration in that perspective, travel grants probably is not that linked with collaboration effort, but whereas research grant and fellowships often has certain component where collaboration is extremely important. So first question is why one should collaborate. So here is a research article. I just read out the things which is in the box. Regardless of the context, team deliberation has been shown to produce knowledge, self-learning for the teachers, provide powerful professional development, and encourage greater collegial interaction. Other published paper or report indicated when teachers become a researcher and they try to interact with different kind of audience. For example, when they try to interact with school children versus university student, when they use this collaborative approach, they actually exceeding in their careers, which is again supported by other studies. For example, this particular study indicated researchers or scientists or faculties who collaborate more, their productivity is also positively linked with their collaborative efforts. That means if you collaborate with larger audience, you are more tend to actually be successful in your career. But then not necessarily everything is really, really great. So there are certain things which also lead to really bad collaborative efforts. So here in one study in PLOS One, which talk about good and bad research collaboration. So let's first talk about what generally researchers expect when they talk about collaboration. So in this particular study, they talk to different people and they find out, in general, researchers primarily look for active involvement in cutting edge research. That means they want to be the best in their field. They have to have effective leadership and they want to hone their leadership. If they feel they are lacking the leadership, they also want to have competence and commitment towards good scientific practice, capacity building. Sometimes collaborative opportunity allows people to go through training, learn new skills, respect the needs and interests of agendas of all partners, trust and confidence, and most important is justice and fairness in the collaboration. But this is the expectation. But then what is the reality? So another study by Boseman et al. Indicated not necessarily everything goes that rosy. So in this table too, which have a heading, bad collaboration factors, where they actually try to talk to people about their whole idea about collaboration. Please read on the left column with the heading, bad collaboration factors. So these includes not meet work commitments. That means you propose something that I will do this work by this time, but their collaborator never actually committed to it. Crediting disputes, who get authorship, is a most common form of the dispute, generally happen when people talk about collaborations. Personality clash. Somebody has very strong personality, do not let other people talk in the meeting. Selfishness, somebody want to take more credit from a collaborative effort than what actually is due. Others are ghost authors. Ghost authors mean some people. Unmute. Can you people hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So sometimes you can find during this collaborative effort that ghost author who are will say really excited about this collaborative efforts, but then the moment the collaboration progress in a particular tangible time, their contribution become less and less, but then they are always there to take credit as a author in the publication. Exploitation. Sometimes a famous collaborator exploit less famous or less trained young faculties. Asymmetric investment. Some people invest more than the others. Organization clash. It's especially happen when you work in public health or sociology, also in biological sciences, where you need to have ethical clearance. And sometimes you collaborate with people with a notion that your collaborator will allow you to get ethical clearance. But in reality, you found out there is an institutional or organizational clash, or there is some problem which your collaborator either may not be aware about, but also might not able to help you in long run, which particularly will affect your project. And find cultural and national origin of difference that happens between when you have a collaborator from India and collaborator from other side, Western countries. I can give an example. So that's my personal opinion. It cannot be generalized. I found we Indians don't say no. We generally say, we make excuses. So somebody say, would you like to go there? For example, we will say, no, I'll not go there. We might say, I have this issue. That's why I might not go there. The moment you go outside of India, for example, in United States, particularly I found all my teachers really hate this kind of explanation. They are very busy people. So they actually try to understand if you want to go or not, rather than involved in this multiple word exchanges. So that is one of the cultural difference can affect collaboration. And controlling collaborator, who actually control the large group of people for his or her or their own agendas. So now, so first, for any collaborative effort, it is very important to actually understand your need, why you need a collaboration. So need can be different. First need could be intellectual input. So that means you as a young faculty is looking for somebody with a senior in your field who can help you to shape up certain section of your proposal, can help you to build up a theory. And that is the intellectual input you're looking for the collaboration. But that clarity have to be in your mind when you actually thinking about collaboration. Second could be the analytical input. This analytical input primarily linked with the need of a particular method. It can be data analysis. It can be, for example, people who work in protein and structural biology, they often use NMR. So maybe your institute do not have NMR facilities. So you might want to use the NMR facility at your collaborator's lab. That is the analytical input or help one might need from a collaborator. Sometimes it could be administrative input. As I mentioned before, you want to work with a patient cohort, but you do not have an ethical board at your institute, which can allow you to get ethical approval properly as per ICMR's norms. For that, you can have administrative input as an agenda for collaboration. And finally, mentorship input, where all of the three, intellectual, analytical, administrative input can be involved, as well as mentor can help you as a very senior faculty or senior professional in your field. It does not matter what is your background or which faculty you can be from, science, arts, commerce, humanities, anywhere. The mentor can help you actually to shape up your career goals in 5 year, 10 year, this different time frame. Because your mentors are generally the people who are very experienced. So they are the people who knows nuances of this career growth and what options are there. So this mentorship can be another option to go for collaboration. So now it's very important that one should know what to expect from a collaborator. So generally, a collaborator can bring very needed knowledge, skills, and resources to a project, what I mentioned before. Collaborator may also have a stronger track record connection with an agency. Here, it's very important. For example, you want to submit a proposal to DST or DBT or UGC, CSIR, it does not matter where. Now, if your collaborator who is a senior professional already know how to write a particular section of a proposal, or how to write your ethical clearance section, how elaborate your proposal would be, because the person already got funding from those agencies, is actually very beneficial for you to do collaboration with the person. Multidisciplinary projects are becoming more common, where people now add, for example, with different discipline together. It can be biosciences with biostatistics, biosciences with geological sciences, biosciences with GIS and informatics, artificial intelligence, you name it, it will be part of multidisciplinary projects. And now the whole understanding is those projects are much more competitive than a single topic related projects. And it also indicates that you are aware about your limitations, about overcoming if you have any. That means as an applicant, you for a particular project or a grant, you actually thought through about your limitations. You are very aware what you might expect to face in future during the project. So you have a collaborator who can help you out to pass on those hurdles. So now how to find a collaborator? There is no straightforward way to find. So here are certain way I'm going to discuss, but you can always tweak the way I'm going to tell you in your own, finding your own best method to find a collaborator. First is Google search using keywords. For example, you might work in sociology, maybe you work with diaspora, and you want to work with somebody who work on diaspora, sociology, people displacement. So you can use those keywords to find out who actually work on those topics in Asia. Similarly, for biological sciences, you can use this combination of keywords to find out those research labs. Another very good area to find out those collaborators is cross-references. We all read papers. So please go back to the cross-references of those papers and try to find out which of the papers is most appropriate to your proposed project or your future plan to attend, go for a particular project or collaborative initiative. So that cross-referencing can be very useful. Sometimes consultation with experienced people, that can be your head of the department, can be some of your senior from the universities, that can help you to find out who are the best people to collaborate. Sometimes it also help you to actually eradicate somebody who could be a bad collaborator. So consultation with experienced people is always helpful. And once you find out some of the information, it's always wise to try to look for the website of the collaborator, which gives you plethora of the information, not only from where this collaborator got some grants, but if the collaborator also have some other collaborators. So you could find out the entire network of these professionals through the website of your collaborator. And there are several websites. For example, EuraAccess, that is a particular website which is based in Europe, and they primarily provide information about different scientists and they, as well as their projects, which is funded by European Union. There are some other job searching websites like Nature Jobs. If you work with ecology and evolution, there are some directory, as well as specialist group. And most importantly, nowadays, people use Twitter to actually find out their collaborators. So now in all this website, you can actually find out certain using keywords of your choice. You can find out if there is a job portal or somebody is submitted any funding or not, and try to collaborate with those people if it actually align with your interest. For example, also in Twitter, now I have seen several of my colleagues actually write, I need a collaborator for this particular subject or technique, and they try to seek help in Twitter. And you can't believe how welcoming people are. So people generally try to post a lot of messages, try to tag your prospective collaborator in those tweeting threads. And that reduces your actual effort to find out and do all this cross-referencing, Google search and everything. So Twitter is, or other different social medias could be really nice place or platform to find out your collaborators. So as I mentioned, specialist group. So I work with this group in Switzerland. It's called International Union for Nature and Conservation for Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN. For example, if somebody want to work, I work on hares and other tiny small animals. So if you go to those specialist groups, you can actually find out who are the people in a particular country work on which species, for example. So you can approach those people for the collaborative effort. Similarly, in India, as well as outside of India, we have several societies which can help you to find out their members, and you can approach those members to be a collaborator in your project. For example, if you work in evolution in India, there is an Indian Society for Evolutionary Biologists. You can just go through their website and try to find out who their members are. Try to write to their patrons or their main office holders, and they can then direct you to the people who might be very useful for the collaborative opportunities. If you work in sociology, for example, International Sociological Association, their website also have each region-specific collaborative or their members. For example, here the East Asia and the Pacific is highlighted. So if you want to work with somebody from East Asia and Pacific, you can click on those sections and try to find out who are the members in those particular area and approach them for collaborative opportunities. Now assume that you have some ideas and you have list a few people to do collaboration. So now how to select those among those list of people? So it can be with research focus. If you're in biology, for example, if you're in ecology or evolution, it can be species or ecosystem. Sometimes it could be country. For example, you want to go apply for a fellowship for Fulbright or Dart fellowship, which is country specific. So you have to search through collaborators who are based in those countries because you want to get hosted in those labs. It can be also for Commonwealth Fellowship where they host mid-career professionals. If you apply for a Shrividam Fellowship, for example, where college teachers and university teachers can actually go and spend some time and get trained through those fellowships. You should also consider the supervision history, and that information you can get from the prospective collaborators website. So now a person with large amount of supervision can also indicate this person have more experience of tackling human resources. For example, we all are human resources. So diverse kind of student the person have supervised in his or her or their career can actually indicate this person probably will be much more open to new ideas, open to new kind of peoples to have in their labs. Publication record could be another good indicator of a prospective collaborator because that indicates how actively this person publish. And which area in recent 5 years or 10 years the collaborators is actually publishing. And that also indicate you in how this collaborators expertise might match with your own need for the collaboration. And also previous and ongoing research trend and fund acquiring records. That definitely is a plus point because then the collaborator knows what is the nitty-gritty of approaching a particular funding agency or establishing the collaboration. But then you often encounter this particular situation where you have two best collaborator. One is really experienced and famous, and one is little less experienced and new. For example, one is a professor and really famous. One is an assistant professor or associate professor and not that famous. Now, bigger question is whom you should select. So there is no straightforward answer to it. So primarily now, again, you have to evaluate. So now there is a pros and cons in both cases. For experienced and famous collaborators, they are generally very knowledgeable, but always remember, because they're famous and experienced, they might have a lot of administrative duties and they might not be able to give you the time for the collaboration or the effort you might be expecting. Whereas because they're experienced, they have a bigger lab, they might have postdocs and other students who can help you out. Whereas new and less experienced collaborators might not have a lot of postdocs, they might not be so famous, but they are really new in their field. So they are very well connected with the larger network of the budding scientists. They are very aware about recent development in the data analysis, for example, or using a particular tools, which is really cutting edge. And because they are now establishing their careers, they are much more motivated to collaborate with other people. So now you have, I'm assuming we have decided whom to approach. So now this is the first communication. So even though I'm pretty sure we all know how to write a particular emails, but then often what happens is certain things certain small mistakes we do in between, which generally does not help in our collaborative efforts. For example, the emails what you're writing, which is the first communication, should be very direct, short, and polite. Remember, your collaborators are often people who are really busy people. Avoid generic letter. That means typical copy and pasting things, and often try to tailor-made your letter for each of your collaborator, because I understand you might be approaching multiple people for collaboration. And enter into a dialogue and write the email as the reason for contacting the person as a subject. For example, please do not write hello or something which does not help the collaborator to understand the topic of the discussion before opening those, and they might consider this email as a spam email. Just to avoid that, probably it's better to write the subject exactly, for example, inquiry about collaborative effort or collaborative opportunity for this grant. This could be one example what you could write in your subject. Avoid vague sentences because people who are very busy, they do not have patience to read longer sentences as well as larger emails. Very briefly write your expectation. So it is very important that you should write that in your emails, so that collaborator know what capacity they have to help you out. And maintain an active public profile, which could be Google Scholar, ResearchGate, LinkedIn, ORCID, or even Facebook. Because often collaborators try to find out if you are a genuine person or not. And attach your PDF copy of your CV with your email. Here, the PDF copy is very important because sometimes when you write documents, and if your collaborator using a different system, for example, you are in Windows and your collaborator is using a Mac or a Linux system, sometimes this Word document get modified because of the system requirement, and all the information you are adding in your CV get jumbled up. So it is better always to add a particular your CV in PDF format. So here I'm pretty sure you know what it is, but then I'm just trying to put some of the emphasis on how it should look. Yeah, sorry, I just missed this page. Professionals, we know how a CV and a resume looks different. but I just try to brush up here because it's very important when you attach your CV in the emails. So CVs are primarily more than 2 pages, and that have the chronology of the live event, whereas resume is generally less than 2 pages. And you add personal contact details, academic and professional details. Please do mention duration, place, supervisor, capacity of the work in your CV. Publication, always follow a particular format, because when you copy and paste different formats, when people go through it, it sometimes create some kind of irritations to people who read lot of CVs. When you write about the conferences, please mention the authors, year, title, venue, etc. Fellowship and research grants, do mention who are the funding agency, when you got it, how much amount you got. It can be in a single line. And relevant skill sets and references are sometimes important, but sometimes if you wish, you might not add it. So now, a typical CV, even though there is first rule how to write a CV, but here I'll show few CVs to let you know how they might look like. So people made in LaTeX this particular software to make this CV. Here it's very uniform, easy to follow, and easy to look at, which is the primary aim, that your collaborator, the moment they open your CV, should able to look at and find all the necessary information in one go. They do not have to find out. So in the first column, the person mentioned exactly different life goals or life stages. Second is the detailed information, and third is a timeline. Here is another format, but then this format is much more horizontal in nature. But again, the information flow remain the same, very symmetric how it looks here. So now here I'll be using one of my colleague CV who used this particular CV to get a collaborative opportunity and a postdoctoral position last month at Aarhus University, Denmark. So he just finished his PhD from Wildlife Institute of India. So he just used a typical Word format, which is available in Microsoft Word, to make his CV. So, but one thing I noticed here is what it did is he used keywords. You can look at the cursor. He used his subject-specific keywords, which is very unique to his CV. Also, he put a publication-related small snapshot where he wrote how many scientific publications he actually authored, the H-index, Google Scholar citation. And this is important because imagine your collaborators or prospective hosts do not have time to read through your 4-page long CV. They can just look at this first page and they probably try to understand, okay, what is the background of this person, what kind of area this person is coming from, and what is the area of expertise is this person's. So here he also mentioned his research experience, and he did in few lines he elaborate those research experiences. He have also mentioned his teaching experiences, where he actually mentioned number of hours he for which module, which subject he did. It's much more detailed, not necessary everybody have to go through that detail, but it's always preferable if you're giving a CV. And grants, so he mentioned which year he got the grant, how much money he got for the grant, and for which purpose he got the grant, and where he went with the grant. So all this information, very crisp way, presented in this particular CV. And then he provided a list of his publications. All are having exactly same format, and his name is highlighted, so you know he's a first author or he's a second author or in a multi-author papers. He has added his references. Now again, references is an option depending on which career stages you are approaching a collaborator. So it's always good to maintain a uniformity and symmetry, but then often people do mistake when they're writing their CV. So now I'm going to show you some mistakes which people make. It looks trivial, but then it's generally happens. And I collected this data from last 6 years. I was teaching at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, grant writing workshops. And these all information are from those workshops where I asked the participant to send me the CV so that I can go through their CV and try to find out if there is any mistakes or some problem with the uniformity and the symmetry as well as abbreviations. For example, here, the person indicates he is in or she is from Gubbi's Lab, LLP, and from Indian Institute of Science. Now, Gubbi's Lab it's not indicated which department it belongs to. So only one person can understand the person belongs to Indian Institute of Science. I also have seen CV where they even do not write Indian Institute of Science, rather they write IISc. So anybody who is outside of India, they might not know what is IISc. So it is better not to use these abbreviations. Sometimes there is problem with the formatting of the CV. For example, here, first column, you can see the person was an intern at National University Singapore. Second row, the person indicate was an intern in Wipro. And the third, the person was a summer project trainee. But then if you look at amount of information provided at the first, for National University Singapore is lot of information, whereas there is practically no information about with whom this person worked in Wipro or at IISc Bangalore in later part. So there is a problem with the formatting here. Amount of information here provided. Sometimes we also tend to write these abbreviation, for example, HSSC or SSC. So this is common abbreviations. Anybody can write it and understand in India. But if you're sending your CV outside of India, they might not know it. So it's better to write higher secondary or 10th or 12th. Sometimes we also write abbreviation. For example, here, the person wrote as PGDCA. So I can only assume this indicates postgraduate diploma in computer application, but that is my assumption. So we should not write anything in our CV which is open for assumption. For language note, you can see that all the first syllable of the languages is caps except for Kannada. But the problem here is, it's not a big problem, but then it indicates the person who is providing the CV might not have attention to detail. So that actually creates a negative vibe in front of your collaborator, who even don't know you, try to know you through your CV. Sometimes in our CV, there are missing information. For example, people write their dissertation information, but they forget to write when they did it, under whose supervision they did it. Sometimes they write article has been accepted to be published, but then it's a really vague sentence because articles have accepted, that means it have been submitted somewhere. So ideally, it should be indicated as accepted or in press, then journal name, and if available, all the detail about the manuscript ID. Now, sometimes if you're applying for travel grant or try to make you do not want to wish to send a long CV, you can make a very small resume, which is often less than 2 pages. Provide only information which is relevant to your communication to your prospective collaborator. Do not provide repetitive informations. For example, if you're applying for a particular application and the application already have certain information about your publication, and you have a lot of publication, it is better to write or your Google Scholar link as a publication section rather than provide the repetitive information and try to add all the information which is not present in other section of the application. The same goes to the funding agency section. Also, please respect basic formatting instructions, because often what we tend to do when we don't have much space, particularly we have a page limit, we tend to reduce the font size and margin. But then imagine the people who read a lot of applications or a lot of CVs, it's really pain for them if you reduce the font size below 10 font. It does not matter, it's a sans serif or it's a Times New Roman or Arial. Anything below 10 is difficult to read. So remember that thing in your mind. Sometimes it's often happen if you approach somebody outside of India, so they might ask you to submit along with your CV in the next email a small research statement. It is not mandatory, but it can happen. So So it generally, research statements, people start with a short introduction about the current research profile or the work profile, expertise, affiliation in precise way, and outline research interest and how it is matches with the collaborators lab, and what is your expectation if you join the collaborators lab, why you are approaching the collaborators. Detail about the work plan if the research is already identified, and reason for applying for a grant or fellowship for which you need the collaboration. And so it helps the person to actually understand your entire journey, as well as the person probably will much more focused on your need and try to assess if the person can be a really resourceful collaborator for you or not. Generally, it goes to 2 to 3 pages, but people prefer to have is less than 2 pages. So now another thing, one have to be really sure that each collaborators, the moment you establish the communication channel with the collaborator, that each collaborator you selected brings really specific expertise to the project and has their own well-defined role. And this well-defined role can only be done through multiple communications. For example, sometimes the role is only for the intellectual input, but if you want to do some kind of analysis at your collaborators lab, then which might require some budgetary allocations, then the budget have to be discussed and the resources before submission of the application to a funding agency. So sometimes it is also good to discuss the expected outcomes when planning the project. That means how many papers you're planning to do, how you will be determining the co-authorship. I'll be discussing about the authorship little later, but here it's one of the primary point of discussion when you are talking to your collaborators initial stages. And always have this thing in mind, each member of the collaboration should get benefit to certain extent out of this collaboration, because it should not be a single person endeavor, because if it is, then it's bound to fail. And communication is the key during the proposal process, as well as the moment you get awarded and you start your collaboration. So always maintain a thorough communication with the person. Also try to understand if you need some kind of institutional support. You might need a letter from the department chair or the head or the higher authority at your collaborators lab to actually establish this collaboration. This needs varies between the institutes. So it is always better to remember that. Sometimes, as I mentioned before, if you want to do some of the work in your collaborators lab, cost sharing should be discussed, and that have to be determined beforehand and can also be discussed with the institute. Assistance with the resources, space use, because some institute also might ask you to go for give them overhead charges, which might not be allowed by your funding agency, because sometimes funding agency give overhead charges only to the principal investigators lab, not a collaborators lab. So these kind of informations or ideas should be discussed while you are establishing the collaboration with the person. Logistical support, and learn procedures for your collaborative institute. For example, if you are applying to, for example, NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences, which is TIFR, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Bangalore, they have the procedure that they are even before the deadline is there. For example, deadline is on 15th of a month. You have to submit at least 10 to 15 days before to their research development office if you want to collaborate with any of the faculties there, and if you need some input from those offices. So these are the procedures at the collaborative institute. You should talk to your collaborators to know it beforehand. And generally, often you might need to have some kind of agreement with the department chair or head. We already, all of you are very seasoned faculties, you know it, but then I just thought to reiterate it them, because often you do not know the collaboration or before making the collaboration, what kind of rapport your collaborator have with the department chair or head. So your project might be in soup if there is a lot of turmoil in those relationships. So it's better to have some kind of assurance from the department chair or head before starting the collaboration. And start gathering all the support early. Please do not wait till the last date of your application submission or when you need the collaboration to be finalized. So sometimes you might also need to provide support letter from your collaborator. So these letters are often people write because at India Alliance, which is India's one of the most competitive funding agency, we found out letters are really, really vague. People do not actually write what is expected out of them. So, so it's ideal a support letter should be indicates what capacity the collaborator will provide the support, description of expertise and infrastructure available at the collaborator's lab, past experience of the supervision as well as the collaboration experience, current research lab, and how the our project fellow, who is the, like maybe you, who will be joining that collaborator's lab, will fit into it. Importance of the fellowship in local and global scenarios, and ensure the letter which you're receiving from the collaborator is in the official letterhead with a sign. Now we all know that recommendation letter, how you should write a recommendation letter. But then here I quickly try to touch upon it just to reiterate the importance of a recommendation letter. You can get it, generally we get it from our mentors. Sometimes we need to get it a recommendation letter from our collaborators also. So generally recommendation letters provide additional information which is generally not part of your CV. And it's an effective way to know a future member of a particular group. And information, your work ethics, is all additional information generally get mentioned in the recommendation letter. But what we generally get most of the time is really a generic recommendation letter, which states like something, I know this person from this date to this date under capacity as a PhD supervisor or postdoc supervisor. But then it does not indicate anything about the proposed project or collaborative opportunities or career stages of the person or the need of the fund of the applicant, which does not help the applicant anyway in the process. So the ideal action would be identify your referee well before the deadline. Sometimes because there are very busy people, you can provide them a draft. If here she is very busy, and a brief introduction, need of the fellowship, suitability, role of the grant in the career, all this you can very briefly mention to your recommender. A well-balanced and practical recommendation letter works best. So as I mentioned, a referee can mention in their letter which capacity they know you, but they should also mention information about your research or important findings, you as a team member, your achievements, previous grants you might have held, fellowships, focus of the particular application, what you're making, and ensure that again, this letter is an official letterhead with a sign. Now we have all these basic things covered, but now one thing which one have to maintain throughout their collaborative event is the communication with the collaborator. So communication happens in different phases and formats. Sometimes it happens in over email, sometimes people prefer, and often it's very common now that initial start of the communication happens over Skype calls or Zoom calls, where the senior collaborator generally asks the junior collaborator to give a 2-minute speech. That means why the person approached the collaborator, what is the expectation. Sometimes they also ask subject-related topic to understand the person who is approaching for the collaboration, what is their idea about the particular topic, and they can also discuss your long-term goals in life. So before doing this kind of communication, check internet connections and settings before. We all know this. I'm just trying to reiterate it, just to brush it up. Try to eliminate all possible interruption. If you expect any interruption, please say it upfront so that your collaborator knows that there might be internet issues, there might be some kind of background noise you might expect. Make your clothing appropriate. Now, I heard from one of my colleagues at Max Planck Institute that when she tried to talk to her collaborator and she was wearing a check shirt, and later the collaborator told my friend that it was very distracting for the person. So appropriate clothing, before that, I never thought about it. Obviously, official formal clothing is always preferable because you are meeting the person in an official category. But then this pattern of clothes is important. I never thought of. So I just thought to mention and reiterate it here. Often it's better to look at the camera if you're not presenting or giving a talk, or like me, I'm just looking at my presentation often and not looking at you people. And if call get disconnected, let them know, start afresh. It's not a problem, it happens. And during this conversation, one have to build up the storyline. How you build up the storyline? You can actually provide them a small draft of the storyline as a research statement, also in this format, abstract of your expectation about the project you might be working on with the collaborator, background and justification of the problem for the collaboration, problem you're trying to address, solution, process or method, activities, and resource needs. And that's help the shape of your, that's help to shape your communication, the Skype's calls much more effective. Also to discuss Gantt charts. So for example, this is a typical Gantt chart people use in ecological funding proposals, which is activity is a first column and quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4 are the time frame. Okay, and you mention those time frame in a different block, and each of the dark color block indicates when you're going to do this particular work. So when you are developing any proposal and looking for collaboration, it's very important to also show this time chart to your collaborator. For example, here is a chart from one of my collaborators' grant proposal. So activity is there, and the person also added typical dates and months and days. So now in your field, you might know how many days or how much time it might require. But then certain things where you need your collaborators' input, they might be the best people to actually assess the days you propose is meaningful or it is over-ambitious. Because sometimes over-ambitious proposal creates really negative marking in the evaluation time, because it indicates that people who are involved in that proposal did not thought through the entire process effectively. So this is also very important to discuss with your collaborator. Another primary important area is budget. So this is a budget from National Science Foundation and Kappa Sigma Kappa Foundation in United States. That's why all the money here is mentioned is in dollar. So it's just an indicative how different things look like. So this belongs to one of my colleagues. But then if you try to put certain budget, it's always better to actually check the budget with your collaborator, because sometimes you might, sometimes you might not have the opportunity to cross-check and know in detail how much this particular analysis will cost. So the collaborator might definitely know how much it will cost, and they can actually help you out with the budget, so that you might not end up at the end of the project with less amount of money, and might not in a position where you really feel stressful that I never proposed this kind of money. Now how I am going to fulfill my objective for this collaborative event. And finally, crux of all of this, where the problem lies, is the authorship, which is one of the primary reasons where this particular collaboration get derailed. So for example, here you can search even in Google, there are several such documents available, how to determine authorship in a collaborative setup. I am here using the Company of Biologists and Society for Experimental Biology, their criteria for determining the authorship. And they are follows. So this table, the first column is the roles, okay? And the second column is the definition of the role. And now I'm just going through the first column so that you know, okay, which areas probably one have to focus. For example, contributor roles, who have conceptualized the study, methodology, who have done field work or the lab work, who have done the software. Sometimes people have this validation things where you have control and experimental setup, formal analysis, who got the grant. So data curation is a really big thing in genomics related studies, or writing original draft for the paper, and visualization. Some people are really great with the graphs, supervision throughout the project, project administration, and funding acquisition. So these are some of the criteria one can use to determine. For example, you have 10 people, and in each role, you can just put against each, the 10 people will be in 10 column. And for each of these column, you can put 1, 1. At the end, you can have a summation, and you can find out who is having higher amount of the values. That means that person probably contribute in that many roles, and then discuss about this while making the authorship criteria for any upcoming publication, which is a typical outcome of a collaborative effort involving with multiple scientists across different institutes. And finally, just to sum it up, the entire talk, identify your needs quickly and do research to identify collaborator and spend time here, because if you end up with a wrong collaborator or somebody who is not that useful for your need, entire collaborative effort might not be that fruitful experience for you. Establish communication channel with the collaborator at earliest, and maintain all the small nitty-gritty, which is I mentioned before, like from your CV to having a Skype call and writing a very precise email with clear-cut expectation in the emails. Clearly lay out roles and expectation is incorporates both what is your expectation from the collaborators as well as what the collaborator will play the role in your proposed project. And maintain the relationship based on the mutual respect and understanding, because often this collaboration is not a project specific collaboration. It goes beyond the time frame of a project. So I hope I was able to provide some of the information, and I love to take questions if you have any. I'll stop sharing now. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Subodh. There are two questions. One is related to social science, other is to management. They are asking that whether collaborations and these, whatever fellowships you were talking about and the collaborations process you were talking about, are they available for management and social science?
Yes. So I'm really sorry because my background is biology. Yes. So I'm biased towards it. But then everything what I mentioned is really basic. It's maintained across all the disciplines. For example, if you're from the management perspective, your need might be very different. But the way you are going to try to find out your collaborator might be quite similar. The kind of etiquette you might be maintaining in your Skype call might be very similar. So now the question comes, opportunities for collaboration. So opportunities for the collaboration, again, depend on the funding agencies, what generally funds. For sociology and management, I'm not that much aware, but then I'm pretty sure that all the government of India related funding agencies provide funds for these. But as a Commonwealth Fellow and as a Fulbright Fellow, I know both management and sociology is a very important area for where people who are teachers at Indian institutes, who are doing PhDs, doing postdocs, they can apply. So there are certain thematic areas, and definitely management and sociology are important part of it. So those things you can apply, like Commonwealth Professional Fellowship. So you can collaborate with somebody in UK and get trained in that particular topic in UK. So for your management, you can go to London School of Economics if you really wanted to do something with management, which have economic related inputs, need inputs or need expertise. So I am not the best person to provide information about the management or sociology, but then I'm pretty sure that's quite similar kind of things one have to remember when they're making the collaboration.
No, your question has been really helpful. I have one question from you. Like the pandemic is bringing a bit of stringency to come. I mean, it's like for traveling.
Yes.
Visas and things are going to be tough. So in the coming year, will collaboration be as easy as it used to be during the previous time?
I think probably it's now become much more easier. Now you have to define how easy. Okay. So me being ecologist, and I love to travel when somebody else is paying for my flight tickets. Okay. It's very clear. So I love to get grants from Government of India. But then problem is it also inculcate a lot of carbon footprint in my part. So now people through online virtual medium collaborate and present. For example, lot of conferences now going to Twitter where people present their slides as a message thread, and in a particular certain time, people can pose questions and people come back and answer them. I recently, last month, attended one conference in Hiroshima, Japan, where inter-conference is for the research administrator around the world. They attended. Conferences, actually, instead of going for 5 days, they have that for entire month. And because people are attending from different countries, which have a different timeline, people log into in their own timeline, send a message to their peers that I'm interested about it. And I submit those messages. And the next time I log in, I actually got answer from my colleagues. So different type of collaborative opportunities is coming. So I think online collaborative opportunities will be more. And also it is very economic. So instead of paying huge amount of money towards your visa, as well as your like flight tickets and travel costs, you can put that money to attend probably 4 conferences. So
okay, yeah, thank you. We have one last question from Mandakini ma'am. Mandakini ma'am, can you please put your question?
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for such an informative session on the topic on which generally people do not talk, sir. And secondly, I want to ask question regarding recommendation letter, which you have told, and you have provided information that whatever information you have provided, if you put all the information, the size of recommendation letter will increase. Will it affect on any kind of application?
No, it does not. It's actually what matters is content of the letter. For example, at India Alliance, I just give a very brief example. At India Alliance, where I work as a grant advisor, we primarily fund public and clinical health as well as basic scientists. So the recommendation letter which we receive from outside of India, they clearly define how they know the person, importance of their scientific questions when they work with this particular recommenders lab, how they actually achieve their science, how they did their science, importance of that in the particular person's career. And that generally go for 1.5 page maximum. But I have seen also people write 4-page recommendation letter, which is embarrassing, long, but then it does not create any negative impact, because that only indicates how seriously this person, the referee, think about the person or the applicant. Sometimes also, I also like to mention one of my colleague, she applied for a Fulbright fellowship. So she actually asked one professor at University of Chicago to give a recommendation letter with whom she never worked. But this person is really stalwart, and they met once or twice in Himalaya studying birds. The recommendation letter clearly indicated that I do not know this person, never met this, only once met the person. This person never worked with me. But here my recommendation will highlight importance of her work. Then he goes on, Professor Trevor Price from University of Chicago, go on entire 2-page importance of the proposed project. It gives the selector very clear-cut idea that not only this project is important, this is also kind of weighted by stalwarts in the field.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
That was really a great information which you have provided to all of us. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir. That was really very informative. And I think it is going to help a lot of the faculties to understand the way by which they can go for collaboration, because everything starts with how can we do it. And you gave an answer to all those questions. So thank you for your time. And thank you for all those precious information you have given to your PPT. It was great to have you. Okay, looking forward to have much more sessions with you, as virtually we are trying to getting connected more and more. Okay.
Yes.
So
yeah.
thank you
so
and thank you everyone for your time.
Bye bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay.